You're listening to FFOP Radio.
Reach the
and welcome to the show. My name's Dave, and this is a Fistful of Podcasts from FFOPradio.com. Back for another great week. We got a special episode here for you today. For instead of my usual co-hosts, I've got not only maybe he's just one of these things. So he's definitely the first guest after the podcast has come back. He's also probably the second paleontologist I ever had on the show. Super glad to have him back. Please welcome with me, Andy Farke.
Hey, thanks for the welcome back. Great to be back.
Man, I gotta tell you, doing this show was half like, yeah, I'm bored and I've got some time. And the other half was like, I could get in touch with all these paleontologists and talk about dinosaurs again.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to be whatever it is that's alleviating your boredom for this afternoon.
Oh man! So let's rehash a little history for those maybe who are new. I met Andy back in whatever it was, like 2017 maybe.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
So at the local museum here in Arizona, they have beer and bones. And Andy here was a guest speaker, and I basically monopolized the table at the Speed Data Scientist event. And soon after, got him on the show, and ceratopsian specialist, super cool guy, home brew master. Like, that's probably I don't think I'm getting that wrong, right?
That's probably the most important of the three you've listed so far.
Yeah, if you follow Andy on Instagram, and I do recommend it, you're there for the beer, because there's more of that than the fossils, but it's more interesting the way Andy does it.
Well, thank you. I think.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. That's the thing. Because I've got plenty of other people who give me just dinosaurs. I like someone to mix it up a little every now and again with something, that's still like science-based, right? Like fermentation's pretty scientific.
It's hard actually to find something that's more scientific. I mean, I would say sometimes it feels like there's more science that goes into making beer than there is into like digging up a dinosaur.
Yeah, because you probably don't spend a lot of time digging while making beer.
Hopefully not unless you have a really bad batch and you just want to bury it out in the backwoods somewhere.
yeah, start some beer-based monster out in the bayou.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I mean, like for my, a lot of the stuff I do on social media, I mean, especially with my Instagram, paleontology, of course, is a big part of what I do, but also like the stuff outside, like I just got to disconnect sometimes and do something that is using a completely different part of my brain and allows me to geek out about something, that has nothing to do with my job or with paleo, and I love dinosaurs. I love paleontology. I love what I do as a profession, but I also I just need to step back for a second and get my head in a completely different space.
Yeah. I completely identify with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's, I just have fun geeking out over beer. I mean, that's, if I'm not thinking about fossils and if I'm not hanging out with my family, I'm thinking about beer. Or sometimes I can combine all three, which is those are the best days, right?
Yeah. I have a very strong theory that there are only two types of people on this earth. They're the type of people who can put their head down, do their job, get it done, go home, live that life day in, day out. And there are other people who have to break out and do literally anything else that'll make them, happy the rest of the time.
That's right. Yeah.
I think you and I are of a kind, is what I'm getting at.
Yes. To make it completely just, I guess to relate to my, to being a paleontologist, I think I'm a better paleontologist if I'm able to step away from it every once in a while. And I think that's true of, a lot of professions. It just ain't good to be on the clock 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's not a recipe for happiness or health.
No matter how much you love something, you have to get away from it sometimes. I just bought a new car, and right now I love it, but I wouldn't love it if it was chained to my ankle.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and the other fun thing is I've made a lot of great friends in the paleontology community who are also home brewers or also like to geek out about those sorts of things. In fact, like as we're recording this, I'm drinking a home brew by a friend of mine who's a geology professor, and she's a home brewer. And so, of course, we connected over geology and rocks and fossils and stuff. But we're also like, when we found out that we're both home brewers, we're like, oh, okay. So I basically, because this is the days of coronavirus, we did like a hostage exchange outside her house. It's like I come in with I have like, my thing of beer for her, and she has the thing of beer for me, and we just swap them, and it's like we never met.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but it's been fun to have that way to connect, with colleagues also, and there's some really great home brewers out there in the paleontology and the geology world.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely feels like it appeals to somebody of a scientific nature.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. There's, you can geek out about the yeast biology. Yeah. You can play with water chemistry. You can look at enzymatic reactions. Yeah. There's just like every different angle that you could possibly look at it.
What's strange about it is it's one of those things that you don't think like science and artistry can meet.
That's true. That's true. But I think like science and artistry, like, they really go so well together.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the really best artists that I know, the people I know personally who are artists and do art I really enjoy, like they really think about, if they're doing 3D art, like what's the material properties of this thing I'm working with, or, this and that. And so they're really thinking like scientists in their approach to just like getting the results that they want.
Yeah, I follow a lot of paleo artists on Twitter and stuff, and just like the method they use to like go through the bone and then flesh out everything, and like it's so incredibly accurate to the information that we have to date. Like some of this stuff is incredible.
It is. And there's like some real creativity that goes with it too, because you only have the bones can only get you so far, and the fossils can only get you so far, and then you got to go to what am I gonna, how am I gonna fill out the rest of this? And then I think there's the artistic angle too, and I found, there's some really great artists out there that do like almost photorealistic stuff, and that's really cool. But I also love the artists who are doing stuff that's a little bit stylized, or maybe even a lot stylized. Because I think that it just gives such a cool different way to look at it. Two of my favorite artists, that I have lots of their stuff hanging in my office, and that are Scott Elyard and Raven Amos. They're Alaskan-based artists, and they do just like some really cool stylized stuff. Each of them has a very distinct style, and it's not anywhere near like photorealistic or even like sometimes even what you'd call representational, but it's just some of the coolest paleo art out there because I think they differentiate what they do, each of them in their own way. And just go beyond, okay, I'm going to paint what it would look like if I stuck my head, into the Cretaceous 66 million years ago.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's look at it a little differently. And I love artists that take off and do things in those different directions.
Yeah, there's a bunch of neat stuff out there, and one of the things I like about Twitter is that like it's the place where I go to like get almost all my paleontology stuff because there's always new articles and stuff coming out. So with that in mind, is there anything going on? Like, are you working on anything new, anything exciting? Is there anything in the field that you're like, whoa, that's something?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's always stuff happening. My problem is it's like too easy to start things and really hard to finish them.
Right.
So I have a lot of sort of like open-ended projects at the moment. So I've been working for about over 10 years in the late Cretaceous of southern Utah and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument.
Okay.
And last summer we wrapped up that field project. But there's just like all the science that's hanging, that I gotta finish. Like we have a new species of pterosaur to finish up. We have, like other bits and pieces of things that just need to get written up. And a lot of this, I just like need to chain myself to my desk and not allow myself to check Twitter and not allow myself to like say yes to another project, whether it's, even if it's one of my own choosing, I just got to do it. So there's those things. And then I, for coming up at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meetings, so that'll be coming up in October here. I'm working with some of my students on presenting some new science that we've been working on. So one of them is an endocast. So like the digital model of the brain based on CT scans of the skull.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
For a kind of horned dinosaur. Another project is going to be like looking at how horse toes show up in the fossil record. And then there's another project on some new fossils from Wyoming. So there's just always new things to work on.
So broad stroke it for the layman, like the non-paleo enthusiast, like where does it go from like, okay, you hit the field, let's say you find something new. Where does that go from there? Like as far as research and papers and whatnot, like big ballpark scheme sort of things.
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the most fun things about it is like either being wrong or figuring out you don't know something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how a lot of these projects start. It's like I find a weird bone, or one of my students or one of my collaborators finds a weird bone, and we're like, huh, this is weird. And then it's like, okay, now we got to figure out what it is. And then like you might send photos around to people, to get some second opinions. You might dig into the literature. You might search online. And then a lot of the time you find, this weird bone that you found. And it's like, oh, it's another one. It's like the 5,000th, this bone from the inside of a dinosaur skull, just like the 4,999 ones that have already been published.
Yeah.
But sometimes you get the thing, and this is, like maybe 1 times out of 100, where it's like, oh, nobody has written about this or nobody knows about this. Like, okay, we found a bone of, say, a pterosaur, one of these flying reptiles. And then we're like, oh, that's cool. It's a pterosaur bone. But, oh, it turns out that pterosaurs have never been found before in this particular area. And then we're saying, okay, that's interesting. It's cool that we've made that, discovered that for ourselves. But now we need to present that to the rest of the world, both the scientific community and then, of course, the non-scientific community.
Right.
So then we'll start digging into the literature. We'll maybe read all about this, try and figure out exactly what bone it is, maybe go to other museums and compare our bone with bones that are from at these other museums. And then we'll write up a paper. Sometimes we'll have like a progress report that we might give at a scientific conference, and we'll get feedback that way. But if we've written up a paper, then we'll submit it for publication at a scientific journal. And then that work is going to go through something called peer review.
Yeah.
Where it's among scientists, we have a very love-hate relationship with peer review. Because two things are like almost universally true with scientists. They will complain about peer review like till their dying breath.
Right.
And also, like, if something isn't peer reviewed, they'll complain about that till their dying breath. So, it's like we love to complain, just like, whatever profession you're in.
Right,
so peer review is when you send it to the journal, and then an editor at that journal sends it out to other scientists or other experts in the field to evaluate it. And then they'll provide comments on the work, and then they send the comments back to you. And either your paper's rejected outright, they say like, okay, the science here is total crap, no way this should be published. Or they might say the science is good, but it could be a little bit better if you change this or add this in. Or very, very, very rarely, they will say, oh, the science is perfect, publish it without revision. That never happens.
Yeah.
But typically you get comments back. And in my experience, and it's very variable, you get the outliers where people are just like jerks in peer review. And that happens. We all try not to be that reviewer. But sometimes that happens. But most of the time what happens is you get like good comments that are written, with the absolute most collegial, collaborative, ideas that say, okay, they genuinely want to help you improve your paper. So then you go through those edits. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it's just like a day or so of work. And then it goes back to the journal, and the editor will sign off on it or tell you to change more stuff. And then once it goes through all that, then it will get officially published, and then it's part of the permanent scientific record. Yeah.
So like when you're saying these are peer reviewed and you're posting, where they are, is there a place online? Is there like a hub where people just go, or like are you targeting specific people to go over your research?
The way it works is it's when reviewers are found, it's not the author, like me as the scientist that's finding reviewers to review my own work. There's a second person, an editor for the journal, that actually assigns the reviewers, gets them, and sorts through all the reviewer comments. Because it's the temptation would be, of course, to say just like, oh, I don't want to have a lot of revisions. I'm going to send it to my 3 best friends.
Right.
And they're going to tell me I did a great job.
Yeah.
So that happens sometimes, but
sure.
That's not standard practice, not by a long shot. So it goes to ideally independent reviewers, and I'm actually an editor for 1 or 2 different scientific publications. And one of the fun parts of the process, as well as some of the hardest part of the job, is finding reviewers to do that. Because I want to find people that I know are going to give have expertise in it. Maybe they've published on that area. Maybe they're a student who's studying that specifically. Maybe they did their dissertation on it or whatever. But I also want to find people that represent, a broad range of the field. So, I don't want to like just get, someone's best friend, who's not going to give,
Right,
also
right.
The other thing, and I think this is really important because science is such an international field and such a diverse field, is I try to get diverse viewpoints, people from different backgrounds. So, that sometimes what happens is journal editors, they'll only contact scientists in North America, and you're missing out on like all these experts, like some of the biggest paleontology communities in the world are in places like Brazil and Argentina and China, and elsewhere.
I can't believe how tight knit the paleontology like community is. Like not only like in North America, but like all over the world. Like every time I see you guys interacting on wherever I see you guys on Twitter or whatever, I'm always reading articles and stuff. And it's just like, I know these people almost sort of kind of, and I know they know each other. And it's like, everybody knows everybody. It's like a big, like it's like a big club almost, I want to say.
It is, and that's that's a dual-edged sword there, because on the one hand, it's great that we all know each other. But on the other hand, it makes it hard, sometimes to be objective.
Yeah, I can see that.
Or, it's like, okay, I got sent a paper, and sometimes I have to say like, no, I can't review this because like I'm collaborating with this person right now, and I can't be, I'm sure I could give an independent assessment, but you just need to know that I have that conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how intricate the process is, because I think most people think after they're done confusing archaeology with paleontology, they think you're just out in the field, you grab some stuff I don't think anyone really understands the cleaning of fossils.
No, I don't even understand the cleaning of fossils. I'm a paleontologist.
It's bonkers to me. Like you can get something and it'll be in rock for another 5, 10, 15, 100 years. Mm-hmm. And I think in most people's minds, you're just like popping them out of the dirt like they're Legos, and you're just throwing them together in a museum or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a whole different process. And it's something like the people that do that cleaning, the really trained experts on that, the fossil preparators that do that, they're amazing at their job.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I have a PhD, not to brag, but I have a PhD, just we'll be upfront about that. And I can do like basic fossil preparation. But when it comes to like the really detailed stuff or the stuff that requires a little bit of extra expertise and attention, like I'm not qualified for that. And so that, it's amazing. Like I am absolutely in awe of the fossil preparators that just, sometimes they go grain of sand by grain of sand to remove, the matrix, the rock around a fossil. And they know like what are the right glues to use in this situation? What's the kind of glue? What, temperatures can we use with this? What's just all these little things that I never even knew to think about. Yeah. And you have these people that are, as these fossil preparators, they're just amazing at their job. And also they have a lot more patience than I do too.
Yeah, like I can't believe how fragile a lot of these bones are. Like on all the, even on the old documentaries when I used to watch on PBS, back then, even as a kid, I was like, whoa, how, they're so, they have to handle them so delicately. And then the ones you see on display are like solid, and that's one thing that I would never be able to wrap my head around is like when you see, cause I see, whatever, somebody posted recently, a crushed Tarbosaur skull, and it left to my own imagination, I could not reconstruct that into something that resembled what it looked like before it got smashed flatter than a pancake.
Yes. Yeah. And in some cases, we just don't reconstruct it because you'd have to tear it completely apart.
Right.
But in cases where stuff is completely prepped out and reconstructed, I mean, that's hundreds or thousands of hours of expertise by a preparator, by a trained technician. And, those folks are amazing. They're just so good at what they do. They make it look very effortless. But, we all know it's not effortless.
Yeah, that's the problem when you get good at what you do. People think, oh, well, it's easy because you do it so well.
Exactly. Anyone can do it.
Yeah. So I think I've got some controversial questions for you.
Oh no.
Now, you can recuse yourself if you want, but
okay.
Now recently I've seen a lot of stuff getting kicked up again, about the micro T-Rex, the nano Tyrannus.
That thing. Yeah.
Where do you stand on that? I don't think anyone's ever going to fully decide, but I do like getting people's opinions.
Yeah. I mean, I think we will be able to fully decide down the line, or, what I've seen is, the original skull that was called Nanotyrannus.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's really good evidence that that's a juvenile T-Rex.
Okay.
And I think, most scientists think that. There's some people that say, oh, there's other specimens that are small things that kind of look like that are definitely not T-Rex. But until those are published, I can't really say anything on them. But, a lot of what would have been called historically Nanotyrannus, it's pretty clear it's a young T-Rex.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And it's not really controversial for me. I think it would be really cool if there was a smaller Tyrannosaur running around next to T-Rex.
Yeah,
maybe
totally.
we'll find something that shows that. But at the end of the day, I don't really care.
Right. I finally had to just let the whole feather thing go. I was getting way too involved in picking aside whether certain dinosaurs were feathered or no. And I was like, unless I see proof, I am not believing a single thing you say. The Chinese one that's all fluffy, I'll believe that because I see the proof. The proof is in the fossils. And I was getting too heated over it. So now it's just sort of live and let live because I couldn't, people passing by on the street don't want to hear my shouted arguments about whether Tyrannosaurus had feathers or not.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, it's fine, whatever, T-Rex was cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think anyone needs to or wants to rather wrap their head around is all these things have been dead for millions and millions and millions of years. We'll never get definitive anything ever. But they're there for the imagination. They're helping us, learn about mechanics, body mechanics. That's one of the things. Okay, this might be one of my pet peeves about paleontology, but when on these documentaries, maybe these is just pop sci sort of bull crap, but when they say, oh, we found this thing, and they're we have no idea how it worked. How did this animal blah, 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 blah. We don't know. How did it do it? And obviously it did. Because it existed. It didn't exist not knowing how to locomote itself or whatever the case may be. But they're always nope, we have no idea, so we give up.
Yeah. And I'm okay with giving up sometimes, or I'm okay with just pushing the mystery button and saying, I don't know.
Yeah, I get the I don't know, but what I don't like is the it couldn't have. It just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
I don't like that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's oh, well, it must have been aliens, because there's no way it could have done this on its own.
Yeah, look, even at a huge concept, that everyone familiar with dinosaurs can at least remember. When everybody thought sauropods and those giant dinosaurs were all aquatic because, they were so big. How did they live on land? And now, obviously, that's been overturned, and we've got plenty of evidence to the contrary. But there are still people out there who are yep, they were swamp dwellers and all this other stuff. So yeah. They'll never be anything that you want them to be in your head to everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that too, because that's whatever. There's no reason to fight over something that you'll never lay eyes on.
Yes. And sometimes, honestly, the fun is to see if you can figure out.
Totally.
And, if you can find the answer, that's even cooler. And if you find out that you'll never know the answer, okay, that's cool too. And maybe someone else will have better luck in 20 years or 100 years.
That's the great thing about science is it never claims to be anything other than this is what we have right now.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Ideally.
Yeah.
Science, sometimes pop science is a completely different beast.
Yeah. Whatever. I don't, I can't hold it against pop culture people to be oh, did you know that this did that and it's completely wrong, because it's not hurting anybody. But
not generally, no,
but here's the thing. If you come across somebody like me who knows the science behind everything and you want to throw your pop science bullcrap at me, we're gonna have a talk.
Yes.
You need to be educated.
Well, I think, my one objection I have with some forms of pop science is when they present science as just a list of facts. Did you know that Velociraptor, weighed 100 pounds?
Yeah.
And did you know that it's that stuff's interesting, but that's just kind of fact collecting. That's not actually talking about how do we know how much Velociraptor weighed? Let's talk about this. And I think it makes those kinds of scientific presentations make things so dry and so uninteresting.
Yeah.
It's okay, it's cool that this is how much Velociraptor weighed. why do I care? You know, and I think the why do I care of like how did we get there is way more interesting than just like did you know?
Yeah, but that's the nature of the beast. Like they want, people want to feel like, I love this thing, but they know nothing about it. But since they like heard some trivia somewhere or another, I have nothing against like being into something. Be into it as deep as you want.
Yes. Yeah.
My problem is when everybody don't ever think you're the expert in the room. How about that? That's a good scientific principle.
Even if you're the expert in the room, don't think you're the only expert in the room.
Yeah, don't assume.
Yes. Yeah. Because you will get burned and you will get burned bad. It may not be today. It may not be next week, but you will get burned.
So, Andy, I want to, before we get too deep into this, I reached out to the Facebook group and I have some questions for you.
Oh, yes.
So,
I'm so ready.
And you know who they're from. Gavin McCullough.
Oh no, Gavin. All right.
He's got a couple. So for those of you not in the know, Gavin is the paleontologist here at the local Arizona Natural History Museum. I can't recommend that establishment enough. So here we go. We got one dinosaur and one brew related question.
Perfect.
Okay. He says, are chasmosaurine teeth diagnostic among chasmogenera?
Oh, okay. So he's asking like, are the teeth different between different genera of this one group of horned dinosaurs? It'd be like for those who aren't experts on this, it'd be like Chasmosaurus, Triceratops, Torosaurus, those things. Yep. As far as I know, they are not.
Okay.
But that said, nobody's ever really looked. The conventional wisdom is that if you have the tooth from one genus of horned dinosaur, one species of horned dinosaur, it looks just the same as the next one.
Really?
But nobody has really checked that. And I think, it's probably generally true. It's not like, one has like, giant ridges on it and the other one is totally smooth or something like that. They all look pretty much the same. But, there might be some details in there that haven't been uncovered. But, it seems like the teeth, at least, like you find one, you've found them all.
Right. And that's the thing. I think at this point, like we've had Triceratops for over 100 some odd years. And all of this sort of subsidiaries thereof. You'd think by now, if something was like majorly amiss with one of them, it would be like somebody's name-making thing, right? Well,
you'd think so, but not really. Like every paleontologist gets a little bit lazy. Like one of the old tropes, for horned dinosaur workers is that the skulls, they all look very different between them, but you look at the things in the body. And it's pretty much the same, no matter what you're looking at.
Uh-huh.
But there have been people that have started to dig into that in a little more detail. One great example is some research by an English paleontologist, Dr. Susie Maidment, who's at the Natural History Museum in London, and she did some really cool study looking at this animal called Chasmosaurus, which is sort of like a cousin of Triceratops. And she found that there's actually, when you start looking at the bones of the skeleton, so like the leg bones and the vertebrae and stuff like that, there's more differences than you would expect between Chasmosaurus and some of its relatives. And I think she makes a pretty good point that, it's not, we've maybe been a little too hasty in ignoring everything that's basically behind the skull.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, that sort of does bear out, because even in, like, let's say the Hadrosaur family, I mean, those radiated into so many crazy, like, horns and frills and bulbs and stuff like that. Like, it makes sense that, like, Triceratops and its relatives would have various changes based on, like, the weather or the environment or like there's tons of factors there.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. So yeah, who knows? But I think often it's good to check those assumptions.
Yeah.
And, most of the time you're going to find out, there really isn't a difference. But, there are times where you're going to find out there's probably some pretty good differences there.
That's one of the interesting things about paleontology to me is, this just makes me think of that for some reason, is like there are still, and I don't know if this is true or not, maybe you can fact check this, but when I was reading Bone Wars, there are claims that there are, things that were brought back to the museum by Cope or Marsh that are still packed up and shelved and have not been touched since.
That is true to an extent. I think it's less true than it was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff has been, looked over. Sometimes looked over too much, but it's like, okay, do we really need another look at this animal?
Yeah.
But I think it is true that that there is some stuff that hasn't been maybe investigated in detail. Like some of the theropods, the carnivorous dinosaurs, like those have been done to death in many cases. But with some stuff, some of the horned dinosaurs, some of the sauropods, and there's still some work to be done. Just a matter of getting the time and the effort to do it.
That's the thing. There are yet species to be discovered. There are possibly specimens in laboratories or on shelves in museums somewhere that have yet to be discovered and as a new species. But then when you think about it, like realistically, the conditions for fossilization are so specific. Like, how big of a slice of the pie of this time period are we actually seeing?
Oh, we're getting just a fraction of it.
Isn't that like insane to think about? Like, all of these magnificent species, dinosaurs big and small, mammals, insects, all the stuff that we can capture, and it's what, like, at best, let's be generous and be like, it's 15% of the life on Earth that got captured in amber or mud or sand or yada yada whatever.
Yeah, and that's a very generous.
Oh, for sure.
estimate.
Yeah, that's in your wildest dreams.
Yeah. What's mind blowing to me is, how it affects like things like what we think about the dinosaur extinction. So that extinction 66 million years ago. Most of what we know about that extinction is based on just a tiny swath of the states of Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota. And we're using that to extrapolate to like what was happening to dinosaurs all over the world.
Yeah.
It's just a tiny, tiny, tiny little swath of what the land mass was at that time. And there's little bits and pieces, in Europe and in Asia and elsewhere where we have other tiny windows into it. But, when you talk about like what was happening, to make all these dinosaurs die off, we know very, very little in terms of, what was happening truly on a global scale for that. For the land record, that's very true. For the marine record, fossils from, of these sea organisms and stuff like that, the record is much better, but there's still a lot of gaps in what we know. Sub-Saharan Africa, there's so little known about what's happening there. Many chunks in South America, even big chunks of North America, like we just don't know about it. And so it's important to keep in mind that our knowledge of the fossil record is just sort of it's like kind of imagine like maybe like you have a salad bowl turned upside down and you're just poking little holes in it. And you have like little bits of light shining in. And that's like your vision of what or your view of what things were like during that extinction.
Yeah, it's so mind-boggling. Like, because all the stuff that's been lost, all the stuff that, that we'll never know of and all that stuff. Just like, but the stuff we have is so weird. Like, you can pretty much be freewheeling and say anything is possible. Almost. Yeah, exactly. And that I think that's why paleontology will always be like a fan favorite in the scientific community as far as like the general public is concerned.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because every kid loves a dinosaur, but not every kid loves a space shuttle, and not every kid loves the sea or whatever. But that's dinosaurs. Even though we know the least about them. That's why they are so compelling to us.
Yeah, and they're as I've said many times in other venues, like they're real world monsters.
Oh, that's
How cool is that? It's like, oh, these are like giant things. They would make they're awesome in the movies, and they really lived. This giant predator that was like the length of a school bus. With teeth the size of bananas. That's something that really lived.
And that's the thing too. Like I feel like, especially, with the general public, the smallest dinosaurs in the world and the biggest ones in the world get like all the press, but there's so many in the middle that I don't think get enough play, because I think for some reason, big or small is like the benchmark of dinosaurs, but nobody bothered to stick a pin in weird.
Yeah.
I think that's shifting now, especially now that like Spinosaurus is gaining like traction in the eyes of people. So now it's like, the wackiest ones. But like there are some, even in like ceratopsians, you may think, oh, they're the cows of the Cretaceous or whatever. But there are so many. That's like saying all birds are like pigeons. But you think about all those birds that live in South America who were wild and crazy. Like that was the ceratopsians too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that even like I'll use the word boring, the boring dinosaurs, some of like the generic plant eaters, like just ask a 7-year-old to draw a dinosaur, like a generic plant eating dinosaur. They're going to give you something with a tail, a body, no horns, no teeth, anything like that. Some of those ones are so cool. I think one of the most underrated dinosaurs is this thing called Camptosaurus. It lived during the late Jurassic, and primarily in North America. Mm-hmm. And it had a lot of other relatives that looked sort of similar to it. And I love that thing because it just has a stupid small head. Like, people always talk about like how small the heads of stegosaurs were. Yeah. And, it's like, I'm used to it. I can accept that stegosaurs had a small head because they have like cool plates and stuff like that. But you look at Camptosaurus or the Camptosaurus, sorry, and it just has a stupid small head and just a regular sized body. And it just looks stupid. There's no better way to describe it. I mean, for those of you that are listening, like look up Camptosaurus online, and it's a weird looking animal. But it's one that's like, it's never going to be like a 5-year-old's favorite dinosaur on the planet. Right. Find me a 5-year-old that thinks Camptosaurus is the best thing ever. And like, they're going to get a prize because like they're exceptional kids. But it's animals like that just don't get the same level of attention as even like a Triceratops or a T-Rex. Right. I've been an advocate. So cool. I've been an advocate for the underdog all of my adult life because my favorite sauropod. I can't say favorite dinosaur, but my favorite sauropod is the Camarasaurus. Yeah. Yep. And it's like a white sedan of a dinosaur. Yes. It's everything you think of when you think just generic. Like it's a long neck, it's got, a head, tail, there's nothing, there's no spikes, there's nothing crazy about it. It's just like it's your Toyota Camry of dinosaurs. Yeah, it's got the most generic looking skull ever on anything you'll ever see. If you picture a Brontosaurus or that kind of long neck skull, you're picturing a Camarasaur skull. Yeah. I mean, it's basically like the animal that paleontologists use to fill in the gaps when they have missing pieces on other animals. Really? Yes. I mean, that's the original Brontosaurus or Apatosaurus skull is, a Camarasaurus skull. Oh, yeah, I knew that. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, that's I knew that was based on a Camarasaurus skull. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. That's nuts. But yeah, I'm a champion for the underdog. Like all those unknown but still interesting, like little or big or medium or just like that's the thing. Like I don't think there is a boring dinosaur because they're a dinosaur. But like you can say, oh well, this one isn't as thrilling as the rest. But still, it doesn't matter. They're like out of your imagination, man. The most boring dinosaur in the world to me is more exciting than the most thrilling animal alive today. Maybe, but personally, I think if we had to like deal with them daily, like I'd probably be pretty sick of Camarasaurus. No, for sure. Like I'm saying, as far as like on a fan basis, not necessarily entangling with them in real life. Okay, that's fair enough. But like, I mean, Camarasaurus, come on, it doesn't even like have a really long neck. No, it's like it's a medium white beefy T-shirt. It is a glass of milk. That's a good analogy. Yeah, it's the beefy T-shirt without the pocket on the front. Yeah, it's your basic Hanes, man. Yeah. It's the one that you stain it with barbecue sauce the first time you wear it, and then it just sits in the back of the dresser for the next 4 years until you find it. And that's part of why I like it. Like the Camarasaur is just this nobody who gets lost in a crowd. Like, but it's got everything you want. As far as like hits all the boxes as far as like, yeah, that's a dinosaur and I like it. But no one's ever, aside from me, and I have the Camarasaur skull tattooed on my arm. That's how much I enjoy the Camarasaur. You might be the only person in the world with that as a tattoo. 100%. I'm in a very exclusive club. Yeah, I guarantee there are far more T-Rex skull tattoos out there. Oh, yeah. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting someone with a T-Rex tattoo. That's true, but, it also begs the question of why you're swinging dead cats at people. It's the best way to find things, the scientific method has led me to believe. Okay, I'm not going to judge.
Oh man. Okay. So also I have a brewing question.
Oh, all right. Perfect.
So, let's see. The question is it possible to overstir your mash? And what would happen to your product if you did?
To over what my mash? Sorry?
Overstir. If you're stirring your mash, is it possible to overstir it?
I mean, on the one hand, the easy answer is no. It's probably not possible. Like, you're still going to get beer at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is, like, if you mess with your mash too much, you can set up some extra oxidation, because the mash is like at that temperature where, you know, if you get too much air going into it, it might set up some of the reactions that'll stale the beer maybe a little more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're like physically stirring it and really sloshing it around, like it's going to set you up for beer that may not last as long, or it may not taste quite as fresh. Like, it's still going to be pretty good. Yeah. So I would say, like, yeah, you know, don't stir it any more than you have to. In my opinion, but it's not going to kill you if you happen to stir it, you know, a little bit extra. It actually brings up an interesting question, because there's like this it's like this almost fanatic cult of brewing called the low oxygen brewing movement. And like it's one of these things where it like has some scientific basis.
Okay.
But as in every hobby, you know, there's the folks that just take it a little farther than it really needs to be.
Yeah.
You know, and they're like, oh, if you have any oxygen like in the room, you know, they're not that they're getting to the point of like flushing their brewing room and, you know, replacing it with an argon atmosphere. Although I think that would probably like be in there, you know, someone's going to think about that now that I've said it. But, you know, they're like, oh, you can't have any oxygen near the mash, and you got to do this and you got to do this. And if you have any oxygen, you know, anywhere near it, your beer is going to turn into like the worst swill ever, and it's going to be completely undrinkable. And if I ever see you doing that, you know, you're a bad person and you should feel bad. And so it's, you know, and that's where those are the ones that'll say like, oh, you should never touch your mash once you've mashed in with your beer. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's a layman's question from the outside. Like, if let's say you're going to make a beer, is there a time variable between one recipe or another? Or are they all pretty much the same sort of cook time?
Oh, for the hot side of the process. So yes, there are variables. So briefly, you know, for anyone that's not familiar with how this works. So if you're doing all grain brewing, which is where you're starting from like malted barley and turning that into beer, there's different mash schedules. Sometimes you can only mash, which is you basically add hot water to the crushed grain, which then extracts the sugars, and there's all these protein reactions and stuff that happen in there, and these various chemical reactions that happen that create the maltose that gets fermented, and these other things. You can like only mash for 30 minutes, or you could mash for 60 minutes. Sometimes people do like 90-minute mashes, just as like a base. So there, you know, you can vary it by a half hour either side. And if you want to go like super traditional, there's this thing called decoction mashing, where actually you take your grains that are wet, they're hot, they're soaking, and you take some of them out and you put them in a kettle, and then you bring them to a boil and you stir them around for a bit, and then you add them into the mash to change the temperature slowly. And that could take like 2 hours, 3 hours, you know, 4 hours. That's way too much work. Some people swear by it as like the best way to make, you know, traditional European lagers. I try it from time to time, usually, especially like when it's a day when it's 100 degrees outside. Like, I don't have the time or the patience or the, you know, the stamina for that. So yeah, there's different ways, you know, you can add all sorts of things to the process that make it take more or less time.
I don't know why, but every time you say mash, it gets me right in the... It gets me.
It's yeah, okay.
I don't know.
I guess we all have our thing. You know?
Because it sounds like some old-timey dance move, and you're like... I don't know. I just love it.
I can see that. Okay, that's fair. In some ways, it's sort of parallel to like the mash that happens when you make whiskey or things like that. It's sort of a similar process, not exactly the same. Sometimes when I talk about, you know, mashing something, people are like, "Oh, you're making moonshine," and I'm like, "No, because A, that's illegal,
right?
And B, like, you know, I don't make liquor at home."
So let me ask you this: you'd be the one to know. So yeah, for the moonshine, I'm sure, you know, obviously you're not making any, but what are people using when they do make it? Like, is it just
totally
corn?
Depends. Yeah, it totally depends. Sometimes it's corn, sometimes it's barley. It's actually a very similar like sort of initial process to how we do beer, because you're sort of doing a fermentation with it and then you're distilling it and all that. We don't distill as a brewer, because distilling would be illegal,
right?
But it's enough of a parallel. But yeah, the basic grains, like anything that makes sugars that you can then ferment to get some alcohol that you can purify. Whether it's sugar cane or just plain sugar, you can even make booze out of plain sugar.
Yeah.
I've even seen people make basically moonshine or schnapps out of beer.
What?
I remember I was in it. Yeah, this was fascinating. This speaks to like a country with completely different laws. So a number of years ago, I was actually there with Gavin McCullough, who we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
In South Africa at a brewery called in very southern part of South Africa on the Cape, and I would see there was like this big stone crock in the corner of the brewery. And if there was like a half finished thing of beer, they would just put it, like someone abandoned their beer, they'd take it away and it would disappear. And then at the end of the night, so we were there, for a couple hours for an event.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of the night, all the serving staff bring out these trays with little shot glasses of clear liquor. And I'm like, what is this? And the guy who's the owner of the brewery says, this is beer schnapps. I'm like,
what?
Where are the beer schnapps from? And he points over to that stone crock in the corner. He's like, every time there's unfinished beer, we just throw it in there. And then every once in a while, we distill it out, so you're there's no germs or anything. And then we just take basically all the dumped beer and you turn it into booze. And so when they bring the schnapps out, that's basically like your sign, like, we want you to get out of here. Here's like your last thing before you go. Like, to do that would be basically illegal in the U.S.
That is the most incredible form of recycling I've ever seen.
It is. And like, I had a good hangover the next morning.
Oh, for sure.
So I don't know if it was the beer or the schnapps or some combination. But I was like, I salute you for repurposing this. Like, waste not, want not.
Yeah, like that is obviously, like, they'll never. There are so many things that you get to experience because I'm sure you've been invited all over the world, right? Like country upon country.
Yeah, I've been able to travel a bit. That's been one of the fun parts of being a paleontologist.
So give me some of the highlights.
Okay, so of course I was invited to a conference in South Africa.
Uh-huh.
And that was a lot of fun. I didn't really do much field paleontology or any field paleontology, but just going there. And I'm like, okay, if I'm coming all the way to South Africa, we're going to go see some wildlife. So we did that.
Sure.
Getting to go to places like Madagascar, totally fun. I did a couple of years of field work there when I was a grad student. That was phenomenal. Got to see lemurs, got to see amazing fossils. Getting to go to places like China and Mongolia and elsewhere. Another highlight was actually in my job as the museum, as we were approached by a museum in Japan who wanted to borrow one of our dinosaur specimens, this little baby dinosaur that was going to go over for a tour of Japan. And we're like, oh, that sounds great. But, and this was actually a legitimate reason, we're like, we need to have a museum staff member accompany the fossil over.
For sure.
To supervise packing and unpacking. Mm-hmm. And this was like, partly it's like, we needed to make sure it got there safely and that it was handled correctly and all that. That's legitimate. And that was perfectly valid. But also it's like, I've never been to Japan. It would be really cool to go. And if I could get someone else to pay for it,
yeah, totally.
That was all the better. Yeah. So I got to go over to Japan for a week and I did a couple days of the stuff with the museum and the expo. And it was just like the fascinating experience of being in Tokyo. And we had, like the stuff on the schedule, but I also had a couple days to just like wander around Tokyo. And I had so much fun. And it's like, I never would have gotten to do that,
Yeah, like
otherwise. And someone else paid for it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's my mantra is never pay for international travel if you can help it. Get someone else to cover it.
Man, yeah, I can't imagine. Like, if I had, $1 million, one of the first thing, like top 10 is like, get on a plane. I don't care what disease is ravaging where. I want to get over to that giant dinosaur monument in China where all those sauropods are essentially on that wall.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God. That's before I die. I don't care if I have to be wheeled out in a hospital bed. I want to see that before I croak.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many amazing things to see all over the world. And I would say it's been a lot of fun and a real privilege to get to see so much of it, as part of my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so envious. Like that's the part where I get revved up. Like, the papers and whatever, you realize the down to earth, like scientific, hard, cold facts of it all. Like it's all, it's all necessary, but like unless you're really invested, those papers can be a little dry.
It can be. It can be. But, it's I think for me, the fun part of all the research, and of course, making the new scientific discoveries is a real thrill. But the other thing that I really enjoy is just the collaborations that go into that.
Yeah.
And, some, especially like the collaborations with people, you just happen to meet in passing. Like right now, I've got a paper that I'm working on that it involves someone I met on that trip to South Africa. And, we had a correspondence. It turns out we had some research interests in common, and, 4 years later, here we are co-authoring something. This colleague is doing most of the work, but they've brought me along, and I'm adding my expertise for it. And it's like, oh, it's so cool, and I just love, that collaboration that happens with it. It's just such a fun part of it. And getting to work, you just meet so many interesting people. Like any community or any profession, there's just a lot of really interesting people in paleontology, even when you step beyond, the cool animals and plants and things like that we're studying.
I think it attracts,
all those other interests are great.
I think it attracts the right type of person. Like if you're the type of person who can still get legitimately excited about a giant monster as an adult, like you're good people.
Yeah. Well, usually.
I'm not saying 100%.
Yeah,
by and large,
field has its jerks. Every field has, its problematic individuals.
Yeah,
but it's all a matter of trying to find like the people that are both geeked out about it, but also like good people.
Yeah, I've not personally, from my pool of expertise, I have not come across one that I have had anything other than like, oh, that's an awesome experience with that person.
Yes, and that I think is true of the vast majority of paleontologists. We're a generally pretty good bunch of people. Yeah,
and that's one of the great things about the field also is like if you're into it and these people you consider rock stars, you have access to them because they're all really approachable. Everybody's super cool about everything. Like can and they say don't meet your heroes, but I've done it on this show on multiple occasions, and so far it's bared, no fruit as far as like the poisonous apples.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And probably there's a self-selected bunch. The kind that would come on this podcast are going to be the better people. Not speaking modestly. Those of us that have accepted guest appearances are generally some of the best in the profession. Really excellent stand-up human beings.
Typically.
Yes. At least in my case.
For sure. Yeah. Like everybody. I'm not trying to blow smoke because. Yeah. We've had Wadel. Obviously, you've been on a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Victoria Arbor was a great find.
Yes.
Gavin, just, spoiler alert for everybody listening. Gavin McCullough is booked to be a guest. So we're going to talk to him about like local paleontology and all the cool stuff he's been doing. Like that's like, it's great. You guys are so cool and approachable.
You've also chosen like the 4 best people in the field. So,
well, I only choose the best.
Yeah.
I'm not going to settle. That's why my favorite dinosaur is the Camarasaur.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I like, as long as I've got you guys, I'm going to express my appreciation for you both in the scientific community and as a human being, because since you make things so approachable, it's not something like I know that when my son is old enough to get into the museum and start learning about dinosaurs, because if I have to, we're, going to live there until he learns about dinosaurs.
Yes.
I want him to know and really appreciate the fact that you can walk up to like Gavin or Dr. Bob at the paleontology department, and they'll totally, like, I can't tell you how many times I've cornered Gavin at events. And I'm sure he is sick of me, but he puts up with me all the time. And that's what's so great about you guys. You put up with us nerds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, at least, I can't speak for everyone. Like, part of what got me into the field were those paleontologists that took a few minutes to talk with me, when I was, when I was a kid, or, answer my letters. And that I can't say that I've done it perfect. I haven't paid it forward perfectly. But I think there is a certain responsibility to the world as a paleontologist, to use the privilege that we have, to do something that's actually kind of a hard profession to break into, to really, spread some of that joy and spread some of, what brought us into the field in the first place, because I was really fortunate, when I was younger. Like, there was some paleontologists that never answered my letters, but there was also some paleontologists that I had some really nice correspondences with when I was maybe 11, 12, 13 years old and beyond. And so, it's those kindnesses that, I try and keep in mind and I try and remember. And, again, I'm never perfect. People might catch me on a bad day from time to time, but, I try and remember that spark. And also, honestly, it's part of what I get paid to do at the museum, right, is to engage with, people outside, not just scientists.
And, I think you were probably coming around in like a perfect age, because I think 60 years ago, I think before, whatever your opinion on like the dinosaur heresies and the shift from cold to warm-blooded and all those big upsets, I think that's when, and this is just from a pop scientific point of view from the outside looking in, I think when Bakker came in and was like, oh, the dinosaur heresies, and like the 80s rolled around and it was kind of starting to gain steam, I think his flamboyant personality sort of opened it up so it wasn't like these stodgy intellectuals.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Because it started out, like Cope and Marsh, like those dudes are elitist, and I think that carried on a little too long. But I think, and that's why I think no matter what happens, Horner and Bakker will be like the cornerstones for me as far as like my gateway drugs were them. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. And I think, and those were some of the main paleontologists of my childhood too. But what I think is really exciting now, and what's I think exciting for those, people that are like really getting into dinosaurs at this point, is there are such a variety, such a diversity of paleontology, heroes out there now, paleontologists, that you can look up to. When I was growing up, it was Horner and Bakker and a few others. And now it's just like, we've got paleontologists all over the world, whether it's men, whether it's women, people, from all national backgrounds and that. And I think that's so cool, in that the face of the field is changing. And I think there's that many more different people that students or, young dinosaur fans or old dinosaur fans can connect with.
Yeah.
Because one thing, when I was young, one of the things that always bothered me a little bit, and I grew up in South Dakota where there's lots of fossils, is, often when you'd see a dinosaur documentary, the expert, might be talking about fossils from my home state, but it's an expert, like from some university out on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, if you want to study dinosaurs, you have to be from the East Coast. and of course, that's not true. And there were, as I learned later, there were plenty of paleontologists from my part of the world. But, those sorts of, things, as we kind of change who's depicted as a paleontologist in the media, I think that can only help, and that can only help more people, connect with paleontology as a science and find someone that really they click with.
Yeah, I think it's definitely gone from like a gentleman's, interest where only, for elites, to like an everybody's club where like literally everybody's welcome. Get in as fast as you can because there's so much to do, and we're, it's cool to find out about this stuff.
Yeah. And one thing I'm really passionate about is making it even more welcoming, because I think ideally, we want it to be a field for everyone. And I really want, anyone that has an interest to feel like they have a place within that. And so, we have growing pains, as, many fields do in that area. But, I think it's only getting better and better.
Yeah. I mean, institutions don't change overnight. So, but the fact that we have seen, even in my lifetime, like progress as far as like, inclusion and like, really getting into it instead of just accepting all the pop science at face value, like, I'm not a huge fan of the dinosaur depictions in movies like the Jurassic Park stuff because I'm too picky about the mechanics of things. But if that's your gateway into it, man, I am totally fine with you enjoying those movies.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not, unless it like negatively impacts me, I'm not going to harsh on someone else's,
For real.
fun. It's just not a nice thing to do. And I think that's where I kind of maybe evolved, in the way I interact with people is way back, I'd be like, oh, well, you should know that the velociraptor in Jurassic Park is not accurate because it has its hands, pronated instead of facing inward, and it doesn't have feathers, and it's too large, and, the tail is too flexible, and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, well, if they want to talk about that, that's great. And I'll certainly present that info in basic form, but it's not my job to be the person that said, because that's not how I want science to.
Right.
I don't want that to be someone's impression of me as a scientist, is that I'm just there to correct them. That's not what we should be as scientists. I want people to understand science and understand the process. And, maybe to understand that, yes, the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are just movie monsters. Mm-hmm. But, there's still all these other cool things that you can learn. And it's not my job, to just be the person that says, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. Because that's not science engagement. That's not science communication. That's just being kind of a jerk.
Yeah. That's the thing. I used to get upset about depictions of things based on their reality. I wouldn't blow my stack or anything, but I would why are they doing this to me? It was a personal attack because they were butchering my beloved dinosaurs. But I'm meh, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a time and a place to have that discussion.
Yeah,
about,
I think so too.
How awful the dinosaurs on Jurassic Park are.
Yeah.
And how good they are in some ways.
Right.
But I don't think that needs to be the centerpiece of every conversation about dinosaurs. It's just not productive. It's not fun.
Oh man. Well, Andy, I do appreciate you coming back on the show. This has been super fun and awesome, and I think. If I can look into the future as I can, my Twitter and Facebook are going to be blowing up with dinosaur articles for the next couple of weeks because of your appearance.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'm happy to be of service.
Yeah, I love it when that happens, and I think I have to do this every once in a while to remind our listeners that.
Well, that's great, and I'm always happy to be back. Have me back anytime you want.
Yeah, this is there some place that I can direct our listeners, if there's a website or something, or maybe you just want some on your Instagram or whatever, promote whatever people can see you. Yeah, so if you want to follow my social media, I'm on both Twitter and Instagram, and you just go for @Andy Farke, ANDYFARKE. Really creative name on that, and those are the best places to see what I'm up to. It's it won't always be the most exciting dinosaur stuff. I do have a lot of paleo. I have a lot of pontificating. I have a lot of progress on my different beer projects. For those that want to see the home brewing, you go to andybrews.com. And you can find all my latest recipes and stuff like that, see what I'm up to, read my self-evaluations of my different beers. Those are the best places to find me in terms of my personal stuff. And if you want to find out more about about my museum, the Raymond Elf Museum of Paleontology, you can go to elfmuseum.org. You can go to Elf Museum on Twitter or @elfpaleo on Instagram, and you'll find us all there. Yeah, I think I follow all of those things. I also follow Sue the T-Rex. I think I might follow. I think I follow Tristan. Sue, listen to this, everybody. Sue the T-Rex has a fire Twitter account. She will lay into people, and it is hilarious.
Yes, although as Sue points out, it is they, them, because we don't actually know the gender of the skeleton or the sex of the skeleton.
Correct.
So that's been a really fantastic, I agree. There's just some really great fun stuff. And I've had a few go-rounds with Sue on Twitter, particularly over our disagreement on how awesome ceratopsian dinosaurs are.
Oh, for sure. I imagine their opinion is very slanted.
Yes, yeah. Well, what do you expect from a T-Rex?
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's never been a better time to be a dinosaur enthusiast because you can literally interact with one over Twitter.
Yes, exactly. I love it. It's awesome.
Oh my gosh. So guys, once again, thanks for listening. If you want to get in contact with us, fistfulpodcast@gmail.com is the usual way. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, all that good stuff. If you don't follow us anywhere, fine. Just listening is enough. So, Andy, once again, I want to thank you. Legitimately, this has been awesome. And I definitely want to have you back when maybe we can be more focused on maybe, rag on some Jurassic Park dinosaurs a little bit, something like that.
Oh, I'll happily do any of that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Podcasts Radio.